I'm just about to switch these E2 grips on this Sig P226 here and put on these magwell grips, Sig factory magwell grips. And I figured, hey, might as well turn on the camera.
Let's go!
So I'm going to show you the best way, at least in my opinion, the best way to get them off, and also the way to install them. When I take them off of this gun, I'm going to install them onto this P226 Elite frame. So I've already got the Elite frame broken down. I took off the hammer spring and the hammer spring post, and also the hammer spring foot. So that frame's all ready to go, and I have to do the same thing to this frame. So rather than doing it twice on the video, I figured I would get this one set up and ready to go, and then I'll do this one on video. So first I'll show you how to take the E2 grip off. And it's really simple. All you need is this tool that comes with the E2 grips and a Q-tip. The only other thing you're going to need is a Q-tip. How you guys doing, by the way? You guys okay? So first thing you're going to do is stick your grip in your E2 tool, just like so. Now you want to turn it counterclockwise. Okay, so counterclockwise from the bottom of the gun. So as you can see, put it in like this, and when I turn this grip tool counterclockwise, and you can see on camera how it just pops the grip up. And you can put it in a vise if you want to put the frame in a vise, but I never need to do that just for this. Okay, now here's where the Q-tip comes in. So when I pop one side up, and it doesn't matter what side you start from, you could start from this side or you could start from this side, but when I pop that one side up, what I'm going to do now is jam this Q-tip in there, just like so. So now as I take the tool back out, as you can see, the Q-tip is holding in place. Pretty much just a placeholder. That's about all the Q-tip winds up being, and you'll see why in a second. So now you're going to pop up the other side. Here you go, I'll show you on here. This is what you're doing. You're popping it up like this. Okay? So you're popping up on it this way. So you know what, I shouldn't have said counterclockwise. Don't let that fool you. It all depends on how you're holding the frame. If you're holding the frame pointing this way with the trigger facing that way, then yes, it's going to be counterclockwise. But maybe you happen to pick your gun up and you're holding it this way. If you're holding it this way, then it's not going to be counterclockwise. So think of it more in terms of you're going to turn toward the direction of the front of the gun. Alright, so whichever way you're holding your gun, when you insert this E2 tool straight through, you're going to turn it up toward that direction, toward the front of the gun. And then see the way that pops up right there? That's all it's doing to the grip. You're turning it and it's popping the grip up. So then the only way to get the other side off is to turn around and pop it up. If you don't have a Q-tip or anything else to hold that lip up, then what's going to happen is when you go to this side and you pop this side up, like so, just like that, then what happens is the other side installs back into place and you're right back to square one again. So what's happening is the very first time you do this, if you haven't seen this video, you'll go side to side a couple times until you realize that you have to do something like this. So that's what that's there for. And then that's about it. It's pretty simple after that. You pop this side up. It's a little tricky. What you want to do is as you pop that side up, see this finger? Pay attention to my index finger. When you pop that side up, you want to just push that. Now when you push that, the Q-tip's going to go flying, but you know, big deal. But just to give you a heads up, the Q-tip is going to go flying every time. No matter how many times I've done this with E2 grips, every single time the Q-tip goes flying. So it's just because it's kind of like the grips are springy. But that's it. Once you get to this point, it's pretty much done. I'm just going extra slow here just so that you guys can really get a good feel. If anybody's never done this and you wanted to clean your gun out or change the grips, then I want to make sure you know what you're doing. The only things you want to look out for, you know, then you're just working side by side. You just want to lift up a little bit, take your thumb, pull up a little bit on the grip, and it comes right off, as you can see. The only thing you want to look out for is be careful of your trigger spring. Whenever you take E2 grips on or off, and really any grips, I make it a point of anytime I'm changing any grips, I always, really, a lot of guns too, it's not just Sigs, it's Berettas and a few other guns that have trigger springs that are kind of, you know, like right there. I always make it a point that you want to make sure that you don't dislodge that trigger spring or get it pinched up in between the grip somewhere where it's not supposed to be. So especially with the E2 grips, because they're just so tight and they hug the gun, tighter than any other grip for a Sig. So you want to really be careful when you put it on, and I'll show you that on that gun in a second. And it's also, anytime you're taking this part apart, I'll show you a little trick for getting off the hammer spring holder. What you want to do, the best way to do it, and there's all kind of ways, guys. You know, obviously there's a lot of different ways you could do anything. I'm just showing you my way. I've taken these grips on and off so many different times that I've tried a lot of different things with Sigs, and this works out the best. You want to find a screwdriver tip that is perfect size for the foot of the hammer. And let me show you on this one that I already took off of that Elite model. So the foot of the hammer, on the heel of the foot, it has a little indentation. Now that shows you how many times I've taken this on and off. As you can see, it's a little bit nicked up and marred up, but that's not a problem. And I'll show you how this fits in. So this exact size of screwdriver flathead tip fits into there perfectly. Okay, and I'll see if I can give you a size here. So that is a number 4. You guys see that? That's a number 4 flathead tip. Make sure your hammer's decocked. A few times I made the mistake, I forgot that, you know, from pulling the slide off, that the hammer was cocked back, and of course that puts all the tension on the hammer spring and makes it a real pain in the ass to pop it out. So you always want to decock it. I'll just zoom in here and show you what I'm doing. So we're going to slide that screwdriver tip right into that back indentation, and I always cover it with my hand. So I'll try and show you, but typically if the camera wasn't on, I would just cover the whole thing with my hand like this and push it up. And then of course, as you guessed it already, that stops you from the spring flying off. But for the sake of the video, I'll just cover it a little bit with my thumb here. So you just push straight up and out a little bit. See that, guys? A lot of you guys might be concerned about taking this hammer spring off. It's really not that big of a deal at all. It's quite simple. As you can see, nothing major. Alright, and a little close up here. This is a 17-pound aftermarket spring, just to let you guys know. So the trigger on this gun is really smooth. There's just a couple more things I want to do to it to make it even smoother, but I installed this 17-pound Wolf gun spring, and I've used these on a few other Sigs, and I haven't had any problems. No issues at all with light primer strikes or fail to fires. None at all. So 17 pounds should work just fine. That's with 9mm, 40, and 357. Okay, so for the E2 grips, they use a different heel and a different hammer spring post. And I'll just show you the differences real quick. This longer hammer spring post is for the E2 grips. It's more ergonomic, so it cuts in more. It allows you to get a tighter grip on the gun, and this one is not. So the shorter one is standard, and that goes along with the longer hammer spring foot. The ergo grips have the longer hammer spring post and the shorter foot. Okay, so E2 grip, standard one. So we'll put the E2 ones up here. The standard one's going to go back onto this stainless steel frame. And all you do is you want to get this hammer spring post and just slip it back in here. Let me give you a close-up of this. Okay. You'll know when you're in there, because when you cock your hammer back, it should push your thumb down. If you're holding this post, it'll push your fingers down. It's not that difficult. Sometimes I nail it on the first shot, and sometimes it takes a couple. There we are, we're in there now. So again, to double check, when I pull back on the hammer, just want to make sure this is in focus first. When I pull back on the hammer, this ought to slide forward, as it did. It's not much, remember, you're just compressing the hammer spring when that happens, so it's not that big of a movement, but just enough where you know you're there. and it just slipped back out while I was showing you. So don't get frustrated on this part. If you haven't done it a lot of times, then it's easy to get frustrated because you may be in the right spot and then you go to put your hammer spring on and it falls out of the right spot, and you'll go back and forth like that a few times. And you know, just remember, it's simple. It's not a big deal, although it can be frustrating. So we're in the right spot. Remember, here's how we double check it. Now I'm going to, if you don't want it to fall out, just keep pressure on it while you're testing it. So see the way when I push the hammer, that retracts, just lets us know that we're in the right spot. Now holding it upside down, that keeps it in the right spot. We're going to put the hammer spring back on. And the new foot, which is actually the original foot that this gun came with anyway. Position everything like so. Now before I lock this foot into place, I always check it one more time just to be sure. So we're good. See the way that's compressing? I'm always, whenever I do stuff like this, I make it a habit of double and triple checking everything I do, because I don't want to stick the foot in and then this happen to slip off and then I have to go through the trouble of taking it back off and all that stuff again. So it doesn't take a whole lot of time to just, you know, keep double checking and keep pressure on it. Again, every time you check it, make sure you keep pressure on it. That'll keep it in the right spot. Okay, so simple to get it back on. Just push it straight up, just like that. No big deal. And the proper place you want to put your hands for this, you want to stick your index finger, and it just sits real nicely in that groove right there. And then that's how you'll hold the frame, and you'll push up with your thumb, just like you saw me do. And I usually use this hand to just hold the spring centered and just ride it right in there. But it's pretty simple. As you can see, it's not that big of a deal. It just goes right in. Double check our function. Looks good. Cock it back, decock it. Alright, that's good to go. Now the only thing left is to put the grips on, and then I'll show you how to put the E2 grips on the other gun. So they look pretty good. I've had these grips on this gun before, but there's something different I want to try with them this time. That's why I'm putting them back on. And then one thing I'll show you real quick. If you're going to be taking your grips on and off a lot, whether it's to clean the gun or maybe you're like me and you change the grips out a lot trying to find the right ones, but even if you're just going to clean your gun a lot, I recommend getting these Hogue hex head grips. I'm not sure if other companies make them, but usually anytime you go to look for these, they're always made by Hogue. And no matter how many times you take them on and off, they still look pretty good. Whereas the slotted head ones, anybody who's taken them on and off a couple times, you know they get gouged up pretty quickly. Even if you're real careful and you try your best, the slotted head always seems to get some kind of a nick or gouge in it, where these hold up much better. Another thing I do that's a little bit different and out of the norm is I put oil on the screws. You know, just a little bit. I wipe them with oil. Now a lot of guys will use a lot of guys are on the opposite side of the spectrum. They'll use Loctite because they don't want the screws coming out once they put them in. And of course, if you use Loctite, then it will hold them pretty secure, and no matter how much you shoot, they're not going to vibrate out. I don't mind them vibrating out a little bit if I have to adjust them and tighten them every now and again. The reason is because with these screws, a lot of times, especially on the aluminum frames, not so much with the stainless frames, or if you have another like carbon steel frame, but with the aluminum frames, if you're going to take the grips on and off a lot, again, even if it's just to clean your gun, but if you're going to take, and when I say a lot, I'm talking about maybe if you're planning on taking your grips on and off at least 5 times. I mean, I'm not talking about hundreds of times. I'm talking about, you know, you'll start to notice what I'm going to say within the first 5 to 10 times of taking them off. But what happens is these screws tend to start stripping out the aluminum frame. All right, so no matter how hard and tough they make this aluminum frame, the steel screws are just harder and stronger. So from tightening them and over tightening them, sometimes you may over tighten it and not realize you're over tightening it, and then shooting them and they're getting dried out. And especially if you use Loctite or something like that, again, what's going to happen is, and I've seen this happen with all guns, this is not particular to Sig Sauers, but I've had any aluminum gun frame that I've ever had, I've seen this happen. Slowly but surely, the grip screw holes here start to get stripped out, and then it'll get to a point to where you're really only holding on by a couple threads, and you may not even notice unless you're really inspecting your gun closely. You guys can comment if you've seen that happen on your gun. I'm sure some of you guys out there have seen it. But anyway, so from seeing that happen too many times, I got into the habit of using oil on my grip screws instead of Loctite, or instead of nothing at all. And ever since I've been wiping a little bit of oil on the screws, I haven't had any issues with it stripping out the aluminum frames. And again, the worst thing that happens is your screws back out slightly. I'm talking about if you shoot it 500 times, you may have to go back and retighten your screws. And not all the time, but you just expect that. Typically anytime I clean my gun, I'll check the screws anyway. So that's me, and that's what I do. Okay, so there you go. Installing grip screws doesn't make for a terribly exciting video, so I figured I'd spare you guys that and just do a quick little edit and get right to the point. So there's how it looks with the new grips on, and we'll do more videos with this gun put together and the X5 magazine and everything. Looks a lot better with the magwell, but I do tend to go back and forth between these grips and the E2s because I really like the way the E2 grips feel, mainly because of the texture of them. Anybody who hasn't had a chance to try these E2 grips out, it's just got a really rough texture, which I always favor rough textures. That's why I like the RTF2 and the original RTF textures that Glock used to use. I wish they would use them again, but the Gen 4s kind of have that style of a texture. But anyway, so I really like these grips for that purpose, although they're just a little too slim. These were designed for, it really was, the Sig made these to market the gun to shooters with smaller hands. Typically people with real small hands haven't been buying full-size SIGs, so they were looking for a way to market it to shooters with smaller hands. Now, you don't have to have smaller hands to appreciate a tighter grip. Typically I always favor guns that have a slimmer, tighter grip. It just makes me feel more secure when I'm holding the gun. I don't mind a larger grip. I use the wooden grips every now and again, and I shoot Glocks, so everybody knows Glocks are blocks and they got a pretty thick grip. Even a 45 Glocks is not that big of a deal, but I do favor thinner grips, and I just like the way it feels. But for some reason, these E2 grips, it's just weird. It gets to a point to where when I use them so much, I start feeling like I need a thicker grip. Anyway, so if you're wondering why I'm going back and forth here, I'm going to shoot with these again on this gun. And on this Elite frame, I'm going to go back to this grip. I'm just trying to give you guys a little extra info here. I'm trying to make a quick video, but at the same time, you maybe have questions, and I want to make sure I answer them. But part of the reason is I like this E2 grip much better on the aluminum frame guns with a front strap checkering. So as you guys can see, this has the Sig Sauer Elite front strap checkering. And I say the Elite checkering is just because it seems like only on their Elite guns do they do the front strap checkering. Usually they just have either a horizontal or a vertical lines cut. This one is horizontal. On the Sig P220s, they're mostly vertical. And aluminum tends to be a little bit grippier by nature than steel does anyway. So these grips on the aluminum gun, it makes for a really nice hold. Whereas on the stainless steel gun, not quite as nice of a hold. So let's get to it. To put these back on, the same process, we'll repeat it with getting the hammer post in there, just like you guys saw on the other gun. Okay. And then test it, make sure we're in there. Okay, now I'm pushing up on the post and the hammer goes back, and you can feel it travel through your thumb, so you will feel that. Notice the grip, I got my index finger through the frame down here in that groove, and that's just a good way to hold it while you're doing any kind of work on the hammer. If you're not going to use a vise, I don't use vices all the time. It's so depending on who you are, you might find it a lot easier to just use the vise. But I'm just so used to doing this freehand, so it's not a big deal. But I push the hammer back. I feel it compressing. Now, if I don't put any pressure on it right now, I'm not going to put any pressure. When you pull the trigger, not a whole lot happens. Okay. If I put it back and I apply pressure to this. See the difference? So that's just, again, you're just double checking and making sure you're in the right spot. Hammer spring back in. This model, in case you're wondering, is still sporting the factory 21-pound spring. Okay, so finger through the bottom, Cover the top with my thumb. Again, I usually use my hand, but it's just to show you guys on the camera. And 21-pound spring's a little bit harder to push up, so just keep that in mind if you have a factory 21-pound spring in there. As you can hear, it snapped into place. Now to put the E2 grip back on, it's kind of like just like anything else, you're just reversing the process minus the Q-tip. So you're not going to need the Q-tip to put an E2 grip on. So if you've never put an E2 grip on before and you're just switching out your old grips, this is all you're going to have to do. You'll just have to change the hammer spring post to this newer, tighter, more ergonomic one. And what you want to do sometime when these are brand new, here's a little side note, really important. If you ordered one of these and it just came in and it hasn't been on a gun yet, okay, so typically if you're taking one off of a gun and putting it onto another gun, it's a little bit easier. But if you just ordered a brand new E2 grip, these are going to be really tight from the factory. I mean super tight. When you first go to put it on, you may even think something's wrong with it. You might think it's not going to fit, or it's the wrong size or something. So be prepared for that. It's going to be super tight. So I'm just going to use my thumb here and kind of spread them a little bit. And remember, again, the most important thing are your decocker spring and your trigger spring, your trigger bar spring. Okay, you want to take extra effort and care not to dislodge those while you're putting this on. Okay, get it started up top, spread it out a little bit. I usually go back and forth, flip it from each side to side, putting it on a little bit more. Okay, you're going to get to a point to where the bottom gets hinged on that screw hole there on either side, and you just want to bend it a little bit, just like the rest of the grip. You just want to bend it into place. Now when you get to here, again, if they're brand new, this is going to be the hardest part. It is going to be so hard for you to get it from here to the finished position. Okay, so bear in mind, it's just because it's tight. Okay, now you could use this install tool, and that helps a lot. Put it in, rotate it toward the front of the gun, and push with the back of your hand, just like so. Okay, flip to the other side, same thing. I'm going to rotate it this way, and I'm going to use the back of my palm here to push forward. And if you'll notice, the top is already in place. Okay, it's really important. So the top is almost where it needs to be. Alright, and we're in. Looks really good. That's what you want to see. So that's a done deal. Now, a couple of things to look out for. And this is, again, it mostly pertains to if you have a brand new E2 grip that has not been installed on a gun yet. When you first install this, it's going to be so tight, you may notice, so I want to give you a heads up, you may notice that right here on the corner of the grip, it may be sticking out a little bit. That's not normal, and because it'll fit and your gun will function just fine. Okay, but it doesn't look good and it's not normal, so don't think that it's okay that it's sticking out a little bit. The reason why that happens, and it could happen on either side, and sometimes it happens on both sides, if you notice that your E2 grip is not completely flush with the frame, I want you to get a really good look at this, anybody who's never done this before. The E2 grip is completely flush with the frame. That's the way it should look. If yours is not flush with the frame anywhere up here, the reason is because the slot that's cut out for the grip holes, you know how the grip holes protrude a little bit on the frame? I don't have a bare frame now, the grips are all back on, but the screw holes protrude a couple millimeters above the frame. Alright, so there's a cutout on the E2 grip to account for that. And when you pop it into place, when it's on perfectly, the cutout is directly on those protrusions, and that's one of the things that holds the grip on really nice and tight and solid. It is a solid grip. In case you're wondering, the E2 grip is a really solid grip, and I would definitely trust it for the long term. I actually trust this a lot better than just standard polymer grips with screws. There's no screws. The really cool thing about the E2 grips is that you're turning 6 items into one. Okay? Standard grips, you have 1 panel, 2 panel, and 4 screws for a total of 6 parts. You're losing 5 parts when you install the E2 grips because it's just one piece, no screws. So pretty cool. But anyway, again, if it's really tight, so how do I finish that? How do I fix that? The way you fix it is you have to grip the gun really hard back here and up front, and you want to push as hard as you can, okay? Grip the gun here with your left hand, well, if you're right-handed like I am, and grip the back right up here where the web of your hand goes, okay? You're going to want to push that as hard as you can, and sometimes you want to kind of shift the gun around a little bit like this. When you do that, you will hear it click into place, and not only will you hear it click into place, but it'll close the gap, and then it should look exactly like this. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment.